Good afternoon and good evening, everyone. And thank you for joining us for Growth Marketing with Grace Ouma-Cabezas. My name is Colin Mahan, and I'm a program manager at the Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center. For those who may not know and are joining us for your first time, the Nasdaq Center is a nonprofit dedicated to enabling entrepreneurs from all over the world to realize their maximum potentials and grow. As you may have just seen in the chat, the Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center, along with our partner Mentor Cloud, launched a free mentor matching platform for entrepreneurs called Mentor Makers. Create your own advisory board to guide and inspire you with in-the-moment mentorship from topic experts and professionals dedicated to providing exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs across all races, industries, and geographies. So find or become a mentor today by using the link in the chat. Entrepreneurs, the dreamers, the doers, the visionaries, who are not just solving the problems our community and world face today, but those that will create a better future for us all. Mentorship matters to all entrepreneurs. Their success is dependent on it. Quick housekeeping item. We're going to open up for live Q&A at the end of the event, so please submit your questions for our presenter in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation. We will hope to get to them all. Again, none of what we do here could be possible without all the amazing support from our sponsors, including Nasdaq, Lehigh University, Bank of the West, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Woodruff Sawyer, BPM, and NZTE. We are continuously humbled by their contributions. Now, during these still somewhat unique times, we're curious on how sentiment is among the entrepreneurs we work with. So we're going to start by taking a couple polls to let us know how you're feeling about your business right now, and also what's keeping you up at night. First one is something we've been measured since the pandemic started, so hopefully sentiment is becoming a little bit more optimistic, but totally understand if fear and anxiety and just surviving are still out there. The second one helps us understand what the responsive programming that we should be hosting here at the center, like in webinars like this one, should be. So your votes help us host future topics around these areas. So I'm going to give this another moment because I don't want to waste any more time before our content this afternoon and evening. So I'm going to end this poll and share those results. Thank you for voting. Looks like optimism is on the rise, but totally understand that those of you who are fearful and surviving out there, hopefully this year with things opening up, gets a little bit better. And finance seems to be keeping everyone up at night. So hopefully with our special guest this afternoon, who's going to be speaking to you about growth and marketing, that will help your books a little bit. So without any further delay, please join me in giving a warm welcome in the chat to our special guest, Grace. She's a growth executive and holistic full funnel marketer with a focus on startups and true hybrid expertise in direct to consumer and digital media. Grace, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I know my bio is a little bit of a mouthful.
All good. It's because you're an expert. So over to you. Good luck and everyone enjoy. Thanks again, Grace.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you so much to Isis and Colin. I'm so excited to be here with all of you virtually today. I have such a heart for founders and I love working with founders and for founders and bringing their visions to the world. So super happy to be here. Okay, ready to start. If you want to progress the slide. Awesome, thank you so much. Okay, so full disclosure, I'm not usually a start a talk with a quote person, but new year, new me. And I really liked this quote from Beth Comstock. Beth Comstock is an executive. She was CMO of GE, I believe, for over 30 years or close to 30 years. Among many other professional accolades. So I'm just going to read this guy out loud. Whether B2B or B2C, I believe passionately that good marketing essentials are the same. We are all emotional beings looking for relevance, context, and connection. This is just, I thought, such a resonant quote and really comes to the heart of where great growth comes from. So back when I was first starting off in the digital space and marketing around 15 years ago, there was this kind of siloed thinking around traditional marketing and like digital marketing. It was almost like science. in traditional marketing that was like emotion and creativity. And there's really these two different sides of the house. Of course, as most of us know, these converged. We follow the consumer, and every marketer has to be well versed in digital business and growing online and growth marketing. But so we grew out of that phase, but there still tends to be, in many organizations or in people's minds at least, this kind of silo between brand and growth, as though they're two kind of church and state kind of separation. I really value a holistic approach and think that relevance, context, and connection are really the pillars of a great growth marketing strategy, and a pillar to a great product as well. So I thought this would kind of set the tone as the foundation of everything as we get into the philosophical foundation, as we get into a very tactical discussion on the three areas that we're going to cover today. Awesome, thank you. So just to recap, some takeaways for today's chat is we're going to dive in a little bit into how to identify the right metrics to focus on, tactics and channels to prioritize unlimited budget, and then how to start thinking about resourcing for your early marketing needs. So I chose these three areas because these are the most common questions that I personally get from founders and for people in the early startup phase. These are my personal FAQs. So definitely interested to hear any questions that may come up later, any builds on these or any additional questions, but I thought this would be a great place to start our talk, since these are the questions I find myself answering each day. Okay, great. So just to dive in. So let's talk about metrics. As I think most of you know, especially in the digital realm, there's an alphabet soup of acronyms in terms of metrics, what to focus on, when. So it's totally understandable that this is a question that I commonly get. One thing I always like to emphasize is these will grow and evolve with your business, right? And I think most people have a sense of that. They have a sense of as their business model changes, the revenue projections will change. Well, so will the metrics that you're going to be looking at from a growth marketing perspective. Those will also evolve too. So just to keep that in mind, as you evolve, this will evolve. But essentially, what I personally always do, what I encourage founders to do and other growth operators to do, is start with how you're monetizing. And I mean, that seems like, yeah, of course, but this either as a building exercise or as an audit is something that I've done in almost every place that I've worked, even places that were a little bit later stage startups, environments, and trying to think about what the missing pieces were. So really starting with really fundamentally, how do you make money? Or how do you plan to make money? And then working through the funnel from there. Either you can call it working up the funnel, working down the funnel, however you want to think of it. But essentially, if it's this core way that you're monetizing, what are the incremental interval steps or the micro conversions that get you there? So I like to think of these two, if you're thinking about it in a customer-centric way, you can think about them as what are these, or you in relationship with your user, your customer, or what are these points where there's a real value exchange there. You're giving your prospective audience something and they're giving you something back. Typically, the thing they're giving you is more information, an email address, more information about themselves, a profile completion, payment information, etc. And how you can progressively build on that until you get to your final conversion. The next part of that, so that's sort of the fundamental, building the funnel, essentially, and what those steps are. After that, once you have that mapped up, you're in a really good position to, I should say, before I move on, is that I try and keep this step when I'm personally doing this exercise to around 3 to 5 steps. I think it could get a little hairy if you start getting the more to 5 steps to your final conversion. So you're really focused on the most important ones. What are those key intervals? And also something to remember is if you don't have all the data yet to think of what that is, that's fine. Start with a hypothesis. The hypothesis is probably what you use to build your model or what you use to build your MVP product. That's a great place to start. And then as you gather real data, you can see, was that step really integral to the final conversion? Was it not? But a hypothesis is a totally normal and okay and great place to start when you're thinking about thinking through this funnel. So once you have those steps down, or you've identified what you think are the steps to get to your first conversion, then thinking the next layer, and we'll go into tactics a little bit more after this part, but what tactics or what channel align with that end result? So if your first step is a landing page visitor, your next step is a sign up, what are the best ways to get to that? And then use that same exercise of working down the funnel for that tactic. So you can really focus on, let's say, the top 3 key performance indicators for that tactic. So now sort of the baseline of the metrics you're looking at are tied to the core of your business. So that's a really important relationship to keep when you're thinking about growth. So you're not going to be distracted by tons and tons of other metrics that maybe they're more health metrics for the channel, for example, like an open rate email. Maybe they're more engagement, type metrics. Those are all important to maybe the specific running of that channel, but when you're thinking of your overall business, you're really focused on the funnel. That's what I like to do. And that's, again, a great building exercise, or can be a great audit for what you're currently doing. And I'll have an example of the next slide. But before we move on to that, just one or two caveats I always like to emphasize too is that attribution is not a science. Attribution is still imperfect, and that's okay. Especially when you're building a growth strategy. A lot of times what you'll see is you're adding something and you're seeing this incremental growth, and you correlate those two activities. But try not to stress too much out about your marketing tech stack isn't absolutely perfect, so you don't know if this is attributing to that. I mean, there's very basic things you can look like traffic, promo codes, et cetera, to get that correlation. And if the overall stats that you're paying attention to are moving in the right direction, try not to get too bogged down in absolute perfect attribution, because it actually doesn't exist. Spoiler alert. Okay, we can move on to the next slide. Great. So just wanted to walk through a pretty simple example here of what I'm meaning about the funnel steps and the associated tactics and KPIs you can associate with them. So here's a pretty simple hypothetical example of a paid subscription product, and specifically the top funnel metrics, because if it's a subscription product, you also have LTV, you have churn, all these things to assess customer value. But when you're trying to first build this funnel, here's an example of maybe 4 key conversions that you can think of and that build on each other. So for example, one can be landing page visits. So if you take that as your first step, your first introduction to a new audience, then you start to think about what are the mechanisms or the tactics that can get folks to that step. Whether it's, SEO, you're creating really great content guided by an SEO strategist or an agency to help you on your blog, and you're optimizing your site for SEO. For example, you're building out your organic social channels, you're launching some early paid acquisition, you're working with partners, referrals, whatever. So on a baseline, you're going to want to know, what's the mix of traffic that's coming from these different sources and how they each contributing. So that can be the first sort of step of metrics to look at as aligned with that first goal. And then you move on to email sign up or SMS sign up, whatever the case may be. You're going to want to keep track on what the conversion rate per source is. That'll help you be indicative to the quality of the traffic that you bring into the visits, right? And how aligned they may be with your ultimate customer. And then within that channel, within that messaging channel, whether it be email or SMS, you're also, of course, going to want to look at total subscribers, open rate, click rate, et cetera, just to see the efficacy of that as a marketing channel for you. But it's all sort of aligned under that second step. So we're still in the nurture phase here. And the next would be something like an account creation or profile completion. So perhaps first you want the email. So now you have that person, you can continue to market to them, but you want to know more about them. So ways that you can pull them through to find out more information about this particular user. As most of us probably know, in this post iOS 14 world, where last I read, I think something like 94% of iPhone users were saying, do not track me on their apps. First party data is even more important. It's always been important, but it's especially important now. So that may be a really important introductory step to kind of elongate your marketing and strengthen your marketing to get more information about your prospective users. So let's say we have that as a hypothetical step before a checkout. So you want to see, for example, how many new accounts are being created? What is that conversion rate looking like? And then finally to their first checkout, right? What's that final conversion rate? And of course, how much revenue you're making ultimately. So you can see that as sort of like the final destination based on the monetization model of this paid subscription product. So that's just an example of how to sort of now assign jobs for each tactic where it is in the funnel. So something that's really I see commonly happen is you can have sort of a misalignment of goals. So maybe there's a channel that's really effective at low cost driving, landing page visits. If you're measuring that channel from direct revenue, it may not seem as effective as another channel, but it's really providing opportunity for scale that you wouldn't otherwise have. So this incremental step helps you really focus on what's the goal of this tactic? Is it hitting that initial goal? Is it helping get to the next one? Because that ultimate trip to the end may be a little bit too far for any one channel. Yeah. So I'm very happy if anyone has follow-up questions specific to the business to dive in, but generally that's the way I like to look at it. Okay, so next, around prioritizing tactics. So very closely related to this metric conversation. And this is really the way, these are the sort of the three pieces of how I work through this in real life. So once you have that funnel view, 3 to 5 steps, you've gotten a sense of what you want, how to get to those specific goals. Now it's really drilling in on what those tactics will be and how you can start building that, especially on a limited budget. I actually really like being on limited budgets. I think it spurs a lot of creativity. I'm just a startup girl. I really love working in those environments. So one thing that I always like to hold true is that a low budget does not mean low quality, right? So you can still really do high quality brand right work without spending a ton of money and still being on a limited budget. Also, just encouraging you to think about this as your MVP marketing plan. This is the way you think about your MVP product, right? In the sense that you're hitting on sort of the key things that need to be hit on. So you have something happening at the top of the funnel, something nurturing in the middle, and addressing sort of the people that are in market right at the second that want the thing that you have, that there's something covering those bases. And you can, of course, continue to build on here. So one thing I think is really helpful in building that organic audience is really thinking about content channels and partnerships as your top of funnel tactics, right? So the premise being, if you're on a limited budget, you're probably not, running a Super Bowl commercial first launch, or you may not be doing any paid marketing at all initially in your initial launch. So thinking about your organic presence, what that may mean, what channels may align best organically with your audience, with your product, whether that be Instagram, YouTube, etc., your own blog, but your blog would still need some kind of distribution channel, if it's not, or you're really leaning into SEO, for example, which is a valid strategy. And also your initial partnerships, like who are people that you can co-create with that can help amplify what you're doing, and really think about that as your top of funnel. And you're optimizing there for reach. So what's going to get the most eyeballs because it's really resonant and this audience is really interested in this, and what has some shareability to it. What's something people are going to pass on to one another, they're going to share, regram, retweet, because it really adds value. And thinking about those pillars again with relevance, content, and connection. I've done some time in my career at brands that have started off as content communities and then built transactional businesses on top of that. So I've sort of seen firsthand how powerful that can be. But it takes time. It takes time to build. So I always feel like it's a really great early place to start. And we'll talk about resourcing and how that connects to that in a little bit. But consider that your top of funnel, essentially. Next, when you're starting to get that stream of early users, early customers, how you can start converting them into ambassadors or referrers, how you can start rewarding them for sharing, for adopting your product early on and incentivizing them to spread the word. So I think there's a lot of different creative ways you can do that. There could be a literal incentive, whether it be a discount, sometimes a mixture of that and some recognition, some gamification. And you can do it in a handmade way in the beginning. If it's just mostly promo codes that you're sharing, et cetera, with these specific people, you can leverage affiliate platforms or out of the box refer programs in order to get that going. But that kind of serves two purposes. It's an early retention lever, which is another tip, never too early to start on retention when it comes to growth. It also can become a growth flywheel for you too, that can really build and become powerful over time. So thinking about simple ways that you can start to leverage those early users are really important, because usually in the beginning you have access to these folks, and they can have a genuine connection with you when your team is still small and still growing. So I think that's really special. Next, then transitioning to the paid side. So I have that here as the third bullet, since the premise is a limited budget. Then thinking about, I like to think of this as from the funnel up here, right? So how can you first get to the folks that are most immediately looking for your product? So if, for example, if you're selling on Amazon, investing in Amazon search, paid search, Google shopping, all these things that are meeting in high intent channels. So you're sort of just doing a sweep. Anyone that's looking for what you're doing right this second can find you. You can maybe then convert them into longer term customers through your lifecycle marketing programs that you'll develop over time. But this is just a way to make sure you're capturing those folks. And as those intent channels, high intent channels, will naturally have some cap on scale, because it's mitigated by how much you're able to invest, how many people are looking for that thing in a particular time. So you may want to add some more prospecting things like paid social, et cetera. My advice is to always add these things incrementally, going back to that point of attribution not being perfect. Add those things incrementally and see how that's contributing overall to your top line, and you'll have a good view on that. But it's sort of bottoms up is how I think about adding in those channels. And next, try to invest in creative and content. I think going back to my original points around those three pillars and not thinking about brand and performance or brand and growth as these two separate sides of the house, really compelling messaging, creative messaging, really great assets can be used in performance channels, right? So there's a lot of opportunity there. You can make it a great video that's primarily seeing the light of day through, paid social retargeting. That's great. That's still enforcing your brand to these early users. So thinking about that investment in creative and content, having been kind of on both sides of that, where, in a limited budget, you have to make critical decisions in what you're going to invest in. So I've just seen there's so much more runway when there's that initial investment in some really great creative talent, because that's a really important component to the performance of your paid campaigns is the creative. So if you can really nail that down and start from a really good foot and not sort of lose focus on that, I think that's a great area. And then finally, kind of talked about retention a little bit with the early adopters, but thinking about early retention, you don't have to come out of the gate with the world's most sophisticated trigger automated program. I mean, you can. If you have the ability to do so, do it. It's definitely worth your time. But you can start really simply in the beginning. What is your welcome message? What is the follow-up message after someone creates an account or signs up or makes their first purchase or whatever the case may be? Leveraging those opportunities when you can have really personalized outreach. I mean, I think in the beginning, when you're first kind of growing your customer base, that adds to the specialness, especially for those early movers who like to be the first to do things. To start some of that personalized messaging to keep people around and keep folks engaged. So I don't think it's ever too early to think about retention. You're going to be constantly reevaluating and redoing your onboarding. There's certain aspects of your product that are going to be in flux. So it's really never too early to start some initial tactics, even if it's based on hypothesis. Awesome. And then next, I'm talking about early marketing needs and how to resource for them. So this is a question I get asked a lot. And these bullet points kind of represent areas that should be covered. Now, other questions you're going to want to ask yourself is, how many people can you bring on? So sometimes this may be one person is filling multiple holes. Some of this may be filled by agencies. Some of this may be filled by contractors. Some of this may be filled with in-house talent, or or most likely a combination of all of this. But how I first start thinking about core functions. So going back to this idea that on a limited budget, the top of your funnel is your owned content, or these own audience you're trying to create through content one way or another, whether it be on your site, a social channel, et cetera. So that, and also building out sort of your early retention, which may be emails, SMS, all of those are words that need to be written by someone. They're creative concepts that need to be developed. So I find a really great sort of player in this early state when you're building out a team is that what I'm calling sort of that content creator / strategist. This is someone who can execute as well, because these are early marketing needs. So somebody who can copyright, someone who can concept things of like what should be the cadence, what franchises you want to do in whatever social channel you're focusing on. And someone who can also execute across that. Somebody who can scrappily make content, native content for different platforms. This is, I think, a really, really valuable player to have on an early marketing team. And you can think about, should that person be in-house, contractor, et cetera, but I think it's a great person to have, especially as you grow and you're going to want to try more things that are owned. You need someone to create all that. Next, we'll have, I'm calling the growth marketer, but yeah, I'll keep calling it a growth marketer. I think that still makes sense. But saying that it could be a person, it could be a contractor, it could be an agency, depending on how you think about it, but a resource that can both execute and guide around paid channels, maybe has some SEO expertise. Maybe this person and the content creator kind of shake hands when it comes to SEO and content. They can find holes from an audience growth perspective that the content can help serve. And ideally also someone who has a mind for and some executional talent around lifecycle marketing, so thinking email, SMS, how you're guiding people through that journey is another key role. Next, as I mentioned, great creative and a designer. I'm mentioning being in an early startup environment where the thought was, we'll figure out the brand visual identity later. Now we're going to focus on X, Y, and Z. We really were at an impasse at a certain place where we had to completely redo the brand because we were actually being held back by the visual identity. It wasn't matching the aspirations of the brand once we started getting some headway. So I think that's a great area to invest early on. Again, if whether that be a freelancer, an agency, temp to perm situation may be good because they could be helping. This person can also help you create what that visual identity can be, which can then inform many other aspects of the brand. So I think this is actually a really critical resource to bring on as early as you can, even if it's just a temp to perm or a contractor situation. And then next is data analytics. So this could live in a couple different places. This may not live in the marketing house. Maybe it lives with the tech and dev team. Maybe it lives with the GM. Maybe it lives with whoever heads up operations holistically. There's going to be a piece that each marketer is going to own, ideally, but having a center for growth reporting, who's responsible for that, what the cadence will be, et cetera, to keep the whole business on track. And then again, I think when sometimes I get asked around, should I hire, should I contract? I mean, now I think as many of you guys know in this COVID world, there's so much flexibility with talent and there's a lot of great talent freelancing right now. So that is definitely an option for any of these roles if you're like, because I think one thing to consider when bringing on an agency is they have to be managed, and who has the bandwidth or the expertise to manage that resource, which can be a pretty big cost center considering your whole financial situation who can really manage them, who can keep them on task. You know, it may be more cost effective to bring in a contractor, for example, and there's so much great marketing talent out there that wants to freelance and wants to work in early stage startups. Just something to keep in mind there. And I think we're almost at the end, huh? Well, time flies when you're having fun, I guess. Anyway, so just to recap where we are here. So metrics, again, so start with how you monetize and then the incremental steps to get there. That's great for building strategy. That's great for auditing a current strategy. And just a gut check on the business overall that you're focusing on the right things. Next, with tactics, thinking on unlimited budgets, thinking about owned channels. And something I want to point out about social is like social media too, especially when you're not, you know, you're still building your team, there's not a lot of resources, and maybe confusing. Is it worth my time to create this channel or that channel? You know, it may work out that you have, usually, even when I've been on larger, more late stage startups, it usually ends up that there's one priority channel, let's say it's Instagram. And then there's other ones that just repurpose that content. So this is something to consider too, you know, like how many channels should I be on? If you know most of the audience you're reaching is on Instagram, for instance, then maybe every other channel can just be taking bits and pieces and sort of have presence there. So if they're looking for you on Twitter, they can find you, but that may not be the area that you focus on to grow. It's just an FYI there. But thinking about own channels as your top of funnel, incrementally adding channels and investing in that resonant, creative, and early retention. Cover the key function when it comes to resources. Think about folks that are Swiss Army knife generalists and can combine one or two things. Those are actually, I think, great hires, because then potentially they can grow with the business. And relevance, content, and connection. Those really are the pillars of great marketing. So that is, oh yeah, I think there's one more slide. I have this like, let's keep in touch slide. Of course, ask questions now, all the questions that you have right now. But if this has helped you, just keep in touch. I'd love to hear how it has helped you and keep the conversation going.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Grace. That was great. Well, as she just mentioned, we have Grace for some Q&A. So I'm sure many of you have questions based on what she's presented on, as well as we have some good ones in the Q&A box already. So if you haven't already dropped in your questions, which seems like they're coming in, which is good news, into the Q&A function, and we'll try to get to all of them. So Grace, first of all, thank you. Amazing overview. I think too often people don't have such a detailed overview of actually measuring how to prioritize. So this first question is, how do you decide which growth experiments to prioritize in the beginning?
Ooh, that's a good question. Not to be a broken record, but I really truly go back to that funnel. You know what I mean? I think it's great to prioritize. Actually, you can kind of look at it two ways. You can either try and push on something that you know, like you can think to yourself, we are so great at getting people to sign up for email. Let's like use that as an example. Is there a way that we can eke even 5% more out of that? Because then that will mean the list grows by X%. So you can look at it that way. Or you can look at an area where you're really tanking and say, we're going to focus on testing on that. So I think as long as it's aligned with the funnel, that's usually is the way to go. But I've done either, because sometimes where you have more opportunity for upside, it's just juicier to test. Also, like you feel good because you're like, it's already good and we're only making it better. And it may actually help overcompensate for areas that are lagging. But then conversely, you can focus on those areas where you're just, something's keeping people from going from this screen to that screen, or whatever the case may be. You're going from this experience to that experience. So
No,
that's a way to prioritize too.
I think that's so helpful because focus is something that everyone deals with as a challenge, but I think founders are challenged with it even more with a million things going on every other day.
Yeah.
So another attendee asked, They run a seed stage SAD, not SaaS startup. At one point, should I spend money on branding? And what percentage of marketing budget should I spend?
What percentage on marketing budget like should be spent on brand?
I'm guessing that's what they're.
Okay. Yeah. I think you should think about branding from the beginning, but don't think of it as money yet, if that makes sense. So thinking about branding as a channel, right? Because it's not, right? Like thinking of it as like your visual identity, how you present in the world. I think it's never too early to think about that, and investing in that. And similarly with the channel investment, I think I really do, because I've done it a bunch of times, I can say this with confidence, like running those brand right assets, even in a performance type channel, like retargeting on paid social, for example, is really a good use of time, So I would so just taking a step back, think about branding first as your assets, your visual identity, your messaging, your copy. Think about that first. And the first place it may live is your landing page or your website. That may be the first place that it lives. So it's the cost of the talent to do it and developing an experience that you're really proud of. That's the first cost. And then you could run performance type channels to drive to that experience.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's less of a percentage, more of a building block.
Yeah.
We've got an attendee with a sense of humor, which I appreciate, Esfandir. He said, how did Grace become so great? That's not a question, but thank you for the compliment, my friend. But he has a serious question. He has a serious question. Where to go? Okay. Can you discuss the difference between growth marketing and growth hacking, which seems more technical?
Yeah.
And where product fits in?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I remember when growth hacking first became a thing. I went to this may be 8 or 9 years ago. I was at a workshop and they were like, we're going to teach you how to growth hack. And I was like, isn't this just, I don't want to insult any growth hackers here. But I felt like, oh, this is just like marketing married with the product experience and thinking about conversion optimization. So taking a step back, this is how I guess I would describe the difference, although I don't feel like they're different, but how I think they're used is growth marketing is thinking about a little bit more top line outside of the ecosystem, when people are saying it, although ideally growth is the whole thing, right? And then growth hacking is a bit more of conversion optimization. How can you get someone from step 1 to step 2 within the product, or design the product intentionally to have that growth embedded in it, if that makes sense. But in its ideal state, that's the whole thing is growth, and the growth and product team are shaking hands and developing things together. But I think that's what people mean when they're differentiating growth hacking from growth marketing.
Yeah, and I remember when the growth hacking phenomena term came out in the beginning, right? Those guys and gals were using some tools that are no longer legal.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's another good point.
Like all the chatbot marketing stuff and all that stuff.
True.
Marketing is like strategy, tactics, and the big picture of how do we get revenue. And I think a lot of the growth hackers get the tools, automation. What's the wild west? What haven't the companies figured out that we're using yet?
Yeah. That's a good point.
I guess it's growth marketing is the adult version of growth hacking. No offense again to any growth hackers.
I don't want hate mail from growth hackers. I love everyone.
I know tons, and I would agree with everything that you said. I guess a topical question from Ashley. Thanks for the question, Ashley. Are there any books you recommend that explore some of these topics on a deeper level? And thank you.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for the question. Oh, I'm much more of when it comes to marketing, I'm much more of an article reader than a book reader. I'm so sorry. That's a great question. And I should have a prepared answer for it because I get asked about books very often. I think that the fundamentals of marketing is really storytelling, and I haven't yet found a book that articles would be helpful too. Actually, I read a lot of Harvard Business Review. Like I am a subscriber. And I just find their insights around business to be super, super helpful. So I read that a lot. A lot of Digiday too, just on trends. I think they're really on with sort of trends and what different businesses are doing. So you can kind of keep abreast of that in the space. That's where I tend to look the most.
Awesome. And I'm sure, Ashley, if you Google growth marketing books, you'd find a long list. Just do the ones that have more than 2 reviews on Amazon. It's easier than ever to self-publish these days. Feel free to pass on this one, but I think it's a good question that many entrepreneurs think about. Can you provide some indication of fair salaries or hourly rates for the resources you mentioned?
Oh, okay, yeah. So what I've been hearing, just because I'm at an early stage startup right now, Poppy Seed Health, and I'm looking at resourcing too. So I'm in a perpetual state of hiring, probably for the last 8 years. So what I heard as recently as today is the roles that I was speaking about on my previous slide, in my mind's eye, I'm thinking that those are probably to start some in the 4 to 5 year experience range. I think probably when you're starting on an early budget, and you can kind of calibrate it, right? Like who's overseeing them, you know what I mean? Et cetera, et cetera. But I'm hearing like probably, I'm sure there's regional differences, but somewhere like on the lower side, I guess the more junior side, maybe 100 an hour, and then going up to like 150, 180, kind of depending on what you're looking at. That's what I've been hearing for like marketing folks. Again, I bet like maybe a 4 to 7 year experience range for those functions.
Mm-hmm. And that makes sense considering how much marketing agencies cost a month.
Yeah.
And they go away and have other priorities.
Yes, versus someone who's there, even if it's 10 hours a week, can be an incredible value add to the business. So.
Yep. Recruiting and retention continues to be challenges for early stage startups.
Yeah.
Speaking of early stage, an anonymous attendee asked, to a startup with no marketing team, which of the 4 functions do you learn yourself and which ones do you really specialist for?
I love that question so much. Yeah, I think you have to, what you learn yourself. Just really look in the mirror and think about what comes most naturally to you. That's what I've seen founders really excel. Like, I don't know if it's my luck or whatever, but I've worked with several founders, for example, that are excellent writers. So they're able to write all those, sort of kind of those early nurture emails, those early welcome emails, they're able to write them. They're able to write content or articles. So they're able to do that. If you're a little bit more on the analytical side, or maybe more creative things don't come to you naturally, it may be worthwhile for you to look up quickly how to run some of those early paid campaigns yourself. You know what I mean? If you're on a small budget, it doesn't hurt. You can start building maybe a paid search campaign. You can start building your Facebook retargeting campaign. That can be something maybe you'll just get going, and you can do your own testing there. So I would say like lean in. If you're a big social media enthusiast like I am, and I haven't yet met a founder that is naturally, some are, just maybe not the ones that I've worked with. But hey, if you have your own following and you're into that, that can be huge too, right? You can, really step up what you're doing on channels that you enjoy. So I think start thinking about what kind of would come most naturally to you.
Yeah. And I mean, founders have to inherently be a Swiss Army knife in the early days.
Yes, exactly.
But yeah, understanding your strengths and things that you don't enjoy doing and finding other people to do them, I think is nice. Yeah. Looking in the mirror. Let's see, what tools from Earl? Hey, Earl, one of our milestone makers. Good to see you, bud. What tools do you use as a non-technical person in order to track the funnel? And this is directly in Earl's best interest because he is working on growth right now.
Oh, great. Congrats, Earl. I think there's a ton of tools. What'll have to be is a little bit of a hodgepodge in the beginning of, you're going to have a stack that's a little distributed. I think that's a nice way to look at it. So if it's web-based, if web is a part of your business, you have Google Analytics for web, If you have a product, an app or something that has integral steps to it, something like amplitude or something that could do more product analytics, maybe what you use to measure that side of the business if you want to track those specific events. And then when you're running paid channels, you'll have those channels you can look at and see what performance is. Email, your ESP. So in the beginning, it'll be piecing things together. You don't need a tremendous amount of technical expertise. If you're creating a product that you're tracking events, there's hopefully somebody around that can at least set up those events for you. But the actual extraction of the data should be something that you can do and throw it in a spreadsheet. That's what I do 99% of the time. So it's not one thing giving you the funnel, but you're building it out in a spreadsheet and you can track it that way. And that's it. It's a perfect place to start.
Amazing. And let's say Earl wanted to put a little bit of money behind solving that problem for the spreadsheet. Are there any tools that you use?
Yeah. There was I was recently at the Skim, my team was using Supermetrics and it helped them automate and they loved it. I didn't personally use it, but my team was using it and they loved that to automate a lot of the reporting across paid channels. That saved them a ton of time. That's the one I've used most recently. That seemed to work really well for my team.
And I've heard of Sprinkler and Hootsuite.
Yeah, there's a bunch. Yeah.
But
and I think Supermetrics is like $10 a month. It's pretty affordable.
Oh, yeah, that's super easy.
Yeah.
Awesome. Great questions. Keep them coming. We got to keep Grace on her toes and also help you all overcome these challenges. How would it go, Oliver? Thanks for the question. How would you start a go-to-market strategy for creating a two-sided marketplace like an Angie's List or a Home Advisor?
Wow, that's a good one.
That's another hour-long webinar, isn't it?
I was like, where do I start? Well, you said where to start. Okay, where would you start a go-to-market strategy for a two-sided marketplace? You gotta, start on the supply side. I don't know if that's too basic of the way to answer this, but start on the supply side and being a part of several two-sided marketplaces. That's the best place to start. It's going to have to, again, be tied into your early growth model and projections because it's always this balance, right? How many people are at the ready? But you said like an Angie's List. So yeah, that still counts because you're going to want some content there, which is the people in the marketplace to get the other folks to come over. So I think start on the supply side, see how you can reasonably and credibly activate that supply side to help grow the demand side. So if you've been able to, the whole sales process of being able to loop folks on that early side, not my area of expertise, but I've worked with people who can do that, and how you can then activate them or incentivize them to share code or become referrers for customers because they want to, more business or showcase where they are. I think that's a really great place to start.
I think it's great advice. And then after you fill that, because if Yelp had 0 reviews, nobody would purchase Yelp ads, right?
Yeah.
But advice that I've heard recently is you want to after you get that initial pool that you recommended, that you should focus on the paid demand side, right? Because
yes,
that's
absolutely.
Money in the bank. People sign up for free all day long.
Yes, yeah, for sure. And you want to keep the people you've engaged on the supply side engaged in working and getting the business or whatever that you promised them. So that's super important to start with after that.
Awesome. So hopefully that helps, Oliver. Maybe our anonymous attendee can give me a little context on this one, but it says websites to find freelancers. And I'm guessing that's in the marketing realm, but that could mean pretty much anything.
Oh, so like folks to work for free?
Freelancers. No, like contractors.
Oh, sorry. Freelancers. Sorry. It's 6:21 on the East Coast. I think my brain took a little trip. I was like, freelancers. So actual sites I've been looking into is like Marketing Hire. I think they're called Marketing Hire. It's literally marketinghire.com. And I reached out to them because their ad on Instagram is really effective. I think they're just like, they targeted me and I was like, I had to call them. There's another group, Right Side Up, they're called. I've used a few times. Their minimums have gone up, just full disclosure. They used to be a little bit more scrappy. So something like marketinghire.com, probably a good place to find folks, and they seem to have really good talent. I'd also like, that's like a quick way for quick placement, which I think is what the question is. But if always putting out feelers on LinkedIn, there could be really great talent that's kind of secretly or covertly trying to build out a consulting business on the side, and that's becoming so much more of a big thing with marketers, and knowing how much in demand the skill set is. So that's another thing.
Yeah, that's great. And if they converted you, they must have had a pretty good ad.
Yeah, it was pretty good.
Awesome. Now, a question from Jill. Thanks, Jill. For a very new online retail business, can you suggest some ways or tools to grow our buying customer base on social or online in general? So e-commerce.
Oh, so e-commerce, how to grow how to grow your customer base, essentially is the question. Yeah, so I think usually, depending on the category, but I think for most retailers, like social is, in paid social specifically, is such a great place. The amount of people that you can get to then sign up for email, because email is should be at least a third or more of your revenue should be coming from email. So also thinking about that first purchase and the email experience people are getting after. And it's worth your time to try and tailor that, because it's really the repeat is really where it's at. But I get it. Like on the front end, social is incredibly effective. Instagram is like a shopping mall now, essentially too. So to the amount that you can hook into all the social shopping platforms, as that may make sense for your business, I think there may be some barriers in terms of business size, but I think the program is out of beta, I think, for IG shopping, and maybe a little bit more widely available. And this is like kind of old school, but like affiliates are still a thing, because content and media companies still want other revenue that's not ads, so figuring out how to get yourself in those roundups and having, is definitely worth your time too on the growth side for e-commerce. And Pinterest. Let me not forget Pinterest when you're thinking about social and e-commerce growth. It's really effective for shopping, and that's been pretty consistent over the years. And I think it being visual and searchable at the same time is really special. So before you even want to invest dollars, invest in your organic presence on Pinterest. I don't know exactly what you're selling, but if it visually kind of fits into that world, that can be a great place too.
I think that's great advice. And you brought up a question that you brought up a thought because e-commerce, you mentioned Facebook being like basically a series of shopping ads, which they totally know exactly what I want, which is hilarious, right? Like I'm just like, oh wow, I really want to click that, even though I'm hard to convert, similar to yourself. But what do you think about TikTok for e-commerce?
Oh yes, yeah, that's a really good one. Thank you for bringing that up. TikTok, and the great thing too is that just the platform itself and how it works, you know what I mean, and how content can be shared. So I think and influencers on TikTok are affordable right now. It's still like an emerging platform. So you can, connect with somebody, even, like a mid-tier or even higher level influencer within your space that's really specific to like who you're going after. They can create a really great piece of content for you, maybe like $500 or something. You repurpose it. So you don't even have to worry about yourself. So you can leverage them for content on your own organic presence. You can leverage them to share a promo code. I've recently been experimenting with that, and it's been incredibly effective. Thank you for bringing that up. So TikTok is another great channel to focus on too.
I have yet to convert to downloading it or using it, but what I have heard is
You're missing out.
I know I'm behind the wave. I'm feel like the grandparent who doesn't want to use a cell phone, right? Like, call me on my landline. But yeah, there's a ton of users on there, and I think from what I've heard from other growth marketers like you is non-polished content is more forgivable on it. Whereas
yes.
If you send me a shaky iPhone video on my LinkedIn feed, I'll be like, ugh. But like if I see it on Instagram or TikTok, I'll be like, oh, there's a story here. It's a human.
Yeah.
Versus
Yeah.
like this person put a production studio together. So
yeah. And you actually get so much more bang for your buck on the influencer side too, because the nature of the platform is you have to do something. You know what I mean? So it's not someone just kind of posing a beautiful pose next to your product in the distance. They're like making you a mini commercial because it's a video platform. So yeah, big fan, big TikTok fan.
That's awesome. And Isis says, I'm a huge TikTok fan. Yeah, she finds a bunch of cool recipes on there.
Yeah.
There's a ton of stuff. I'm old school and afraid of change. I don't know. I'm afraid of what it'll do to my productivity. Well, if there aren't any other questions, we have a couple that are pre-submitted that I maybe we'll nail one and then we'll let everybody fly off into their busy days. But are there some non-social media ways to increase sales?
Yeah. You mean if thinking about own channels or paid or both or just in general?
Yeah, I think they may be it's a pre-submitted question, so
I
think it's maybe like talking about direct mailings, maybe. Like, is that still a thing?
Yeah, no, direct mail is definitely still a thing, and you can dip into it at not a huge budget, though I would say probably at minimum, I think you're gonna want at least $5K to spend at the very minimum. But it doesn't have to be a huge investment, and it's getting a lot more targeted. There's a company, it's called Lob, that they can do direct mail as a retargeting tactic. So you can use use direct mail on your existing customer base and pull them back in. They kind of do it programmatically, which is cool. So there's a lot more like targeted things you can do in direct mail, and it's breaking through. And I mean, I don't know, I live in New York, but like every DTC startup I get their direct mail, I'm like on the target list of everything, and it's like really nice.
Because you at one point.
Yeah,
I get excited. I get excited when I get mail that's not a bill, though. You know, so I think.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, direct mail is for sure still a thing.
Awesome. All right, Earl. Another question from my boy. Hardest skill to learn from the growth side, and also what's the easiest low-hanging fruit for us that are starting from zero?
Yeah. Hardest skill to learn on the growth side. Oh man. Can I give like a philosophical answer? I think it's like patience. Like, I don't know. I think everything can be. I think the patience, and also I think the timing of like how long things take. I mean, it's not necessarily a skill you can learn, maybe, but I think that's the hardest thing. I mean, we all want it instantaneously, and we all want to do it. And I feel like it's focus and patience are probably the hardest things, because you can do a bunch of stuff all at once, you know. But I guess more tactically, I would say like paid search, but that's me. You guys may be smarter than me. But that's the thing.
We are out of time, but there was one last question that I believe I would know your answer to, so I want to make sure I get to Laura's. Their ask is there any difference between what you've talked about in growth for nonprofits?
Oh, I would think that many of these things are applicable. Probably the conversion step would be making a donation or something like that. But I think the ways there are very similar, and I think the tactics can be really similar too. And we're communicating with people and compelling them to take an action. So I think it's applicable.
The ask is just different wording.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Amazing. Well, Grace, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, insights, and just time with us today. It's been great to learn with you, and I'm sure our attendees online appreciate it too. We're getting a bunch of thank yous in the chat. So Thank you for joining us so much, and we appreciate everybody joining us online. We look forward to seeing you at our future events. We've got a couple of cool ones, so check those out. Grace, appreciate you for joining us, and everyone online, we look forward to seeing you online soon.